In the gleaming glass tower of Harmony Tech in downtown Chicago, Mark Harlan stood at the window of his corner office, watching the morning sun glint off Lake Michigan. 5 years had passed since the divorce papers were signed, and the ache had long since faded into quiet acceptance. At 42, Mark was now CEO of a thriving mid-sized software firm that put people first in every decision. He had built it on small, consistent acts of kindness, paying for an employee's child's surgery out of his own bonus, giving extra time off to caregivers without question, and always choosing the path that lifted the team rather than crushed the competition. Colleagues called him the gentle giant of the industry, a man whose selflessness seemed almost old-fashioned in the cutthroat tech world. Today was supposed to be routine. A final merger meeting with a potential acquirer, a Fortune 50 giant named Ether Corporation. Mark had prepped his presentation late into the night, not because he needed the money, but because he believed the partnership could let his company's humane culture spread even wider. He straightened his tie, grabbed his laptop, and headed downstairs to the executive conference room, heart steady, smile ready. The room was already full of sharp-suited executives from Ether. Mark shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and launched into his pitch about sustainable growth rooted in employee well-being. Then the door at the far end opened. A woman in a tailored navy suit walked in, tablet in hand, posture commanding the entire space. Mark's voice caught mid-sentence. The woman was Laura Bennett, his ex-wife, now the newly appointed CEO of Ether Corporation. Her eyes met his across the polished mahogany table, and for one frozen second, the past 5 years vanished. She gave a single, professional nod. Please continue, Mr. Harlan. Mark swallowed, forced his smile back into place, and kept speaking. But inside his chest, something shifted, a quiet storm of surprise, memory, and the sudden realization that the biggest deal of his career had just become deeply, unexpectedly personal. The presentation ended with polite applause, but Mark barely heard it. Laura moved through the room with effortless authority, shaking hands, asking pointed questions about integration timelines and cultural alignment. 5 years ago, she had been a driven VP at a smaller firm, frustrated by Mark's refusal to chase every dollar at the expense of his team. Their divorce had been civil but painful. She wanted the fast track, he wanted balance. Now here she was, running one of the world's most powerful companies, her name on the cover of Forbes twice in the last year. After the group session broke, the Ether team filed out, leaving Mark and Laura alone for the first scheduled one-on-one. She closed the door softly. "Hello, Mark. Mark." Her voice was calm, professional, but her eyes held the same sharp intelligence he remembered. "I knew Harmony Tech was on our list. I didn't realize you were still at the helm." He offered a gentle smile, the kind he used with nervous interns. Congratulations on the promotion, Laura. Fortune 50 looks good on you." They sat across from each other. She asked about the company's values, and Mark answered honestly, describing the employee assistance programs, the mental health days granted without paperwork, the way he personally mentored young fathers so they wouldn't miss their kids' milestones, the way he once feared he had missed theirs. Laura listened, pen tapping lightly on her notepad, but something in her posture seemed heavier than the confident CEO she projected. When he finished, she simply said, "War approach is refreshing. We'll talk numbers tomorrow." As Mark left the building that evening, the city lights reflecting on the river, he felt an unexpected pull of compassion. Whatever path had brought Laura to this height, it had clearly cost her something. He didn't know what yet, but the man who had spent 5 years choosing kindness over resentment decided right then that whatever came next, he would meet it with the same open heart that had rebuilt his life. The next morning, the negotiations moved to Ether's sleek headquarters on the 40th floor overlooking the Chicago River. Mark arrived early, coffee in hand, ready to fight for the protective clauses that would keep Harmony's culture intact. Laura presided over the long table like a conductor. She was brilliant, decisive, pushing for aggressive cost synergies and tighter timelines. Yet Mark noticed the small things, the faint shadows under her eyes, the way she rubbed her left wrist when no one was looking, the brief hesitation before she overruled a kinder suggestion from one of her own VP. During a break, he caught her alone by the espresso machine. "You okay?" he asked quietly, voice carrying only the concern of an old friend. She glanced up, surprised. Fine." Just the usual pressure, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Back in the room, the discussion turned tense when Etha's finance lead proposed sweeping layoffs in overlapping departments. Mark leaned forward, calm but firm. We can achieve the same savings through attrition and retraining. These people built the products that made this deal attractive. They deserve a chance to stay and grow. Laura studied him across the table. For a moment, the room went still. Then she surprised everyone. Mark's right. Run the numbers on retraining first. The finance lead blinked. Mark felt a small surge of hope. That evening, as the team wrapped up, Laura asked him to stay behind again. This time, she didn't hide the exhaustion. You haven't changed, she said softly. Still putting people first even when it costs you. Mark shrugged, a gentle laugh escaping. Some things are worth the cost. He offered no advice, no judgment, only the quiet space of someone who had once shared a life with her. In that small moment, a crack appeared in the polished armor she wore for the world. Day 3 of negotiations brought the first real twist. Etha's board had demanded a final cultural audit, and Mark's team presented glowing employee testimonials about the family-first environment at Harmony. Laura listened intently, but midway through the presentation her phone buzzed. She stepped out briefly. When she returned, her face was pale. Mark noticed immediately. After the meeting, he found her in the hallway, staring out at the city skyline. Whatever it is, he said simply, you don't have to carry it alone today. She hesitated, then told him. Her mother had been diagnosed with advanced cancer 3 months earlier. Laura had been flying between Chicago and Boston every weekend, trying to run a Fortune 50 company while sitting through chemo appointments and arguing with insurance companies. The board knew nothing. The pressure was crushing her. Mark listened without interrupting, then offered the only thing he could. I take my place at tomorrow's strategy offsite. I'll cover your calls. Spend the day with your mom. I'll make sure the numbers still line up. Laura stared at him. You do that? This deal could make or break your future too. He smiled softly. Some things matter more than deals. She accepted, voice catching. The next day, Mark stepped into her role flawlessly, defending Harmony's values while protecting her schedule. When Laura returned that evening, eyes red but lighter, she found the merger documents updated with new provisions for family leave across both companies. She looked at Mark with something close to wonder. For the first time in years, the woman who had climbed to the top by never showing weakness felt seen, truly seen, by the man she once thought too soft for the world she wanted to conquer. The negotiations entered their final week, but the atmosphere had shifted. Laura began quietly incorporating more of Harmony's people-first policies into the integration plan. Mark kept his word, never leveraging their shared history, never asking for favors. Instead, he focused on the employees caught between the two worlds. One afternoon, an unexpected crisis hit. A key Harmony engineer, Jamal, learned his 8-year-old daughter needed emergency heart surgery in 2 days. Company policy at Ether would have required him to use all his tow or risk the merger bonus. Mark walked straight into Laura's office. Jamal has been with me since day 1. He built the algorithm that powers half our revenue. He needs 3 weeks, fully paid, no questions. Laura looked at the file, then at Mark. The old Laura would have cited policy. The new pressure cooker CEO hesitated. Mark didn't push. Boolean push. He simply said, I know what it feels like to watch someone you love fight for their life while the world demands you keep producing. If we lose them because we were too rigid, we lose more than talent. We lose our soul. Laura closed the file. He approved. And I'm adding it as standard policy going forward. Jamal got his leave. The team erupted in quiet gratitude. That night, Mark received a single text from Laura, thank you, for reminding me why I started this journey. He replied with one word, always, always. The merger was no longer just business. It had become a bridge built on small, selfless choices that neither of them had expected. With the deal days from signing, a larger storm arrived. A whistleblower leaked document showing that Etha's European division had quietly cut corners on data privacy, risking massive fines and reputational damage. The board demanded immediate damage control, and fingers pointed toward cost-saving measures Laura herself had approved before she knew the full picture. Panic rippled through the executive floor. Laura called an emergency meeting at 7 p.m. Mark, still technically an outsider, was invited because Harmony's systems would soon be integrated. He listened as executives argued for spin, for settlements, for scapegoats. Laura sat at the head, jaw-tight, shoulders carrying the weight of a company that employed 200,000 people. When it was his turn to speak, Mark stood. We tell the truth. We own the mistake. We fix it publicly, and we use this moment to build the most transparent privacy framework in the industry. It will cost us short term, but it will earn us something money can't buy. Trust. Silence fell. One board member scoffed. Laura met Mark's eyes. She saw the same steady compassion that had once driven her crazy and now felt like oxygen. She nodded once. We do it Mark's way. The room erupted in debate, but Laura held firm. Over the next 48 hours, Mark worked beside her team, drafting the public statement, designing the new safeguards, even volunteering Harmony's own engineers to help audit the systems at no extra cost. For credit. He simply showed up day and night because it was the right thing for the people whose data they had failed. The public statement went live on a Thursday morning. Stock dipped, analysts questioned the leadership, but within hours, something remarkable happened. Customers flooded social media with stories of how Ether had helped them in the past. Employees sent internal messages of pride, and quietly major partners reached out saying they respected the honesty. Laura stood in her office watching the news tickers, exhausted but lighter than she had been in months. Mark found her there, 2 coffees in hand. You didn't have to stay this late, she said. He shrugged. Neither did you. They talked then, really talked about the 5 years apart. She admitted the corner cutting had begun when the pressure to deliver quarterly miracles became unbearable. He admitted that after the divorce he had thrown himself into kindness as a way to heal the emptiness. Neither blamed the other. Instead, they found common ground in the middle. Ambition and compassion were not enemies. They needed each other. As they spoke, a new realization settled between them. The merger wasn't about one company swallowing another. It was about 2 people, once broken apart, now helping each other become whole again in ways neither had planned. The emotional peak arrived on the final day before the board vote. A group of mid-level employees from both companies had organized an impromptu town hall, fearful that the new combined culture would favor profits over people. Laura was scheduled to address them, but her mother's latest scan results had come in that morning, and she was barely holding herself together in her private office. Mark found her there, tears she would never let the world see streaking her face. Without a word, he took the prepared remarks from her desk. "I've got this," he said. She started to protest. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've carried enough today. Let me carry this one for you." In the packed auditorium, Mark stood at the podium, voice steady and warm. He spoke not as a Kurd protecting his deal, but as a man who believed every employee deserved dignity. He shared stories of the people he had fought for at Harmony, the lives changed by small acts of decency. He promised that the new Ether Harmony would measure success by how many families got to eat dinner together, not just by stock price. The room was silent, then erupted in applause that shook the rafters. Laura watched from the wings, unseen, her heart cracking open in the best possible way. When Mark stepped off stage, she met him in the hallway. No words were needed. She simply pulled him into a hug that said everything the last 5 years had left unsaid. In that embrace, the act of selfless support had done what no contract ever could. It had restored something precious between them. The board voted unanimously to approve the merger the next morning. But the real victory was invisible to Wall Street. Laura announced a new executive role, Chief Humanity Officer, reporting directly to her, and offered it to Mark. He accepted, not for the title or the money, but because it let him keep doing what he did best, making sure people were never just cogs in a machine. Over the following weeks, the combined company rolled out the privacy overhaul, the expanded family leave policy, and the retraining programs Mark had championed. Employees who had once feared the merger now spoke of renewed pride. Laura's mother's treatment continued, and Mark made sure Laura's calendar always had protected time for Boston flights. He never asked for anything in return. He simply showed up, week after week, with the same quiet selflessness that had once defined their marriage and now redefined their future. One quiet evening on the rooftop terrace of the new headquarters, Laura turned to him under the city lights. "I thought kindness was weakness," she said. "You just proved it's the strongest thing I've ever seen." Mark smiled, the same gentle smile that had started everything. We both had to walk our paths to learn that. They stood side by side, not as exes, not even as boss and subordinate, but as two people who had found their way back to the best parts of each other through nothing more dramatic than choosing compassion when the easier choice was to look away. 6 months after the merger closed, eHarmony was named one of the most admired companies in America, not for its revenue, but for the way it treated its people. Laura stood on stage at the awards ceremony, accepting the honor and publicly thanked the man who had reminded her that leadership and humanity could walk hand in hand. Mark sat in the audience, clapping louder than anyone, his heart full. The company thrived. Families were supported. Careers were saved. And in the quiet moments between board meetings and strategy sessions, two people who had once ended a marriage found something even better. A partnership built on mutual respect and the simple, powerful choice to be kind when no one was watching. The city lights of Chicago sparkled outside the windows, and for the first time in years, both Mark and Laura looked forward to whatever came next, knowing that whatever challenges arrived, they would face them together, one selfless step at a time. The Chicago skyline glowed softly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the new combined headquarters on a crisp autumn evening 6 months after the merger had officially closed. Mark Harlan stood on the wide rooftop terrace, the wind gently tugging at his charcoal suit jacket, a warm paper cup of coffee in his hands. Below him, the city lights stretched endlessly, cars moving like slow rivers of gold along Michigan Avenue. He had just finished another long day in his new role as Chief Humanity Officer at eHarmony, the company that had once been two separate worlds and was now slowly, carefully becoming one living, breathing entity that put people at its center. The title still felt strange on his tongue when he introduced himself in meetings, but every time an employee stopped him in the hallway to say thank you for the new family support program or the expanded mental health leave, the strangeness melted away into something warm and deeply satisfying. Home. Laura Bennett, now firmly entrenched as the CEO of the Fortune 50 giant, had changed in subtle but profound ways since that first shocking day when Mark had walked into the conference room and seen her again after 5 years. Her sharp edges had softened not into weakness, but into a kind of quiet strength that came from allowing herself to be human in front of others. She still commanded every room she entered with the same effortless authority that had propelled her to the top, but now there were small moments where she paused, listened longer, and chose the kinder path without needing to justify it with spreadsheets and quarterly projections. Mark had watched it happen day by day, never pushing, never reminding her of their shared past unless she brought it up first. He simply showed up, did his work with the same selfless consistency he had always carried, and let the results speak for themselves. Tonight, the terrace was quiet. Most employees had gone home to families or evening plans. Only a few lights remained on in the offices below. Mark leaned against the railing, thinking about how life had a way of circling back when you least expected it. He remembered the early days after the divorce, when he had sat alone in a small apartment wondering if choosing kindness over ambition had cost him everything. Now here he was, helping shape one of the most powerful companies in the world, not by fighting for power, but by quietly insisting that power should serve people. It was a strange, beautiful full circle. The sound of the terrace door opening behind him pulled him from his thoughts. He turned and saw Laura stepping out, her navy coat draped over one arm, her hair catching the breeze. She looked tired but peaceful, the kind of tired that comes after a day of meaningful work rather than endless pressure. In her hand was a second cup of coffee, which she offered to him with a small smile. "A thought you might want a refill," she said, her voice carrying that familiar warmth mixed with the professional calm she had perfected over the years. "You've been in back-to-back meetings since 8 this morning. Even the gentle giant needs fuel sometimes." Mark accepted the cup with a grateful nod, their fingers brushing lightly in the exchange. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of months of rebuilding trust. A thanks, Laura. You didn't have to come up here. I know you have that call with the Tokyo team in 20 minutes. She waved it off, joining him at the railing and looking out over the city. Tokyo can wait 5 minutes. I needed some air, and I wanted to talk to you about something. There was a quiet seriousness in her tone that made Mark turn to face her fully. He had learned to recognize these moments. They were never about business metrics or deal terms anymore. They were the real conversations, the ones that reminded him why he had chosen to stay and help build this new version of the company. Laura took a slow breath, her eyes tracing the horizon where the lake met the fading orange of the sunset. I've been thinking a lot about the last 6 months, about how you walked into that conference room and everything changed. Not just the merger, but me. I spent 5 years climbing as fast and as hard as I could because I thought that was the only way to matter, to be respected, to prove I could do it without anyone holding me back, including you. Mark listened without interrupting, his expression open and kind, the same way he had listened to hundreds of employees over the years when they needed someone to simply hear them. He didn't offer quick reassurances or try to rewrite their history. He just stood there present, letting her words find their own space in the cool evening air. She continued, her voice softening. When my mom got sick, I thought I could handle it the same way I handled everything else, by pushing harder, by not letting anyone see the cracks. But you saw them anyway. You stepped in without being asked, without expecting anything in return. You covered for me. You fought for Jamal's daughter. You pushed for the privacy overhaul even when it risked the stock price. And you did all with that same quiet kindness that used to drive me crazy when we were married. A small, self-deprecating laugh escaped her. I used to think it was weakness, that the world would eat you alive if you didn't fight for every inch. But watching you these past months, it's the strongest thing I've ever seen. You didn't try to take credit. You didn't use our past to gain leverage. Well, no. You just kept choosing to lift people up, even when it would have been easier to look the other way. Mark took a sip of the coffee, giving her time before responding. When he spoke, his voice was steady and heartfelt, carrying the authenticity that had always defined him. I didn't do any of it to prove a point, Laura. I did it because it was the right thing. For the people who work here, for your mom, for the version of you I could still see underneath all the pressure. 5 years ago, we both wanted different things. You needed to chase the top. I needed to know I was building something that didn't break people along the way. Neither of us was wrong. We were just on different paths. But somehow those paths brought us back here, and we get to choose what we build together now. And Laura turned to face him fully, her eyes meeting his with a vulnerability she rarely showed to anyone else in the building. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. The board is pushing for even more aggressive expansion into Asia. They want faster growth, bigger market share. The usual numbers game. But I keep thinking about the town hall you spoke at, about measuring success by how many families get to eat dinner together instead of just by stock price. I want to do more of that. Not just as a side program, but as the core of how we operate. I want to create a global family support network, real resources for caregivers, expanded paternity and maternity leave that actually means something, mental health programs that aren't just posters on the wall. And I want you to lead it. Not just as Chief Humanity Officer, but with real authority to make changes across all divisions, even the ones that are still resistant. Mark felt a quiet surge of emotion at her words. This was the Laura he had always believed was there, the one who had the brilliance to reach the top and now the heart to use that position for something greater than herself. He set his coffee down on the wide ledge and nodded slowly. I'd be honored to lead it, but only if we do it together. This isn't my vision or your vision. It's ours, the best parts of both of us. Ambition that serves people instead of the other way around. They stood in comfortable silence for a long moment, the city humming far below them. Then Laura reached out and placed her hand lightly on his arm, a gesture that carried more meaning than any contract or board approval ever could. A thank you, Mark, for not giving up on the idea that kindness can actually win in a place like this. For reminding me that I don't have to choose between being a strong leader and being a decent human being. The conversation lingered late into the evening. They talked about specific plans for the new global initiatives, about how to handle the inevitable pushback from some of the old guard executives who still measured everything in cold quarterly returns. Mark shared stories from his early days building Harmony Tech, the small acts of selflessness that had slowly built a loyal team that stayed through tough times. Laura opened up more about the years after the divorce, the loneliness that came with constant travel, and the pressure to never show doubt. We never showed doubt. She spoke about her mother's improving health, how the extra time Mark had helped create had given them moments they might never have had otherwise. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic rekindling of old romance. Just two people who had once been married, who had hurt each other in ordinary ways, now finding a new kind of partnership rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, they finally headed back inside. Laura paused at the elevator, turning to him with a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes in a way it hadn't in years. "Oh, tomorrow morning we present the new family support framework to the executive team. I want you to lead the presentation. Show them what real impact looks like." Mark nodded, returning the smile with the same gentle warmth that had defined him for so long. "I'll be ready. And Laura, whatever happens, we keep choosing the path that lifts people, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." The next morning, the executive conference room was packed. Senior leaders from both the old Ether side and the Harmony side sat around the long table, tablets and notebooks in front of them, expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. Laura sat at the head, her posture commanding but open. Mark stood at the front, no slides full of aggressive growth charts, just a simple presentation focused on real story. He spoke about Jamal's daughter, now recovering well after her surgery, and how the extra leave time had allowed Jamal to be there every step of the way without losing his position. He shared anonymous testimonials from caregivers who had been able to support aging parents without choosing between family and career. He talked about the privacy overhaul and how honesty, though costly at first, had actually strengthened customer trust and employee pride. Some of the more traditional executives shifted uncomfortably when Mark proposed expanding the programs globally, including generous support for international employees dealing with family crises across different cultures and time zones. One VP, a sharp numbers man named Richard, who had been with Ether for 15 years, leaned forward with a frown. "This all sounds very noble, Mark, but we have shareholders to answer to. Expanding these benefits across 50 countries will cost tens of millions in the first year alone. How do we justify that to the board when our competitors are cutting costs to stay lean?" The room went quiet, all eyes turning to Mark. Laura watched him carefully, but she didn't step in. This was his moment to show what he had been quietly proving for months. Mark met Richard's gaze steadily, his voice calm and authentic, carrying the heartfelt conviction that had won over so many people before. "I understand the concern, Richard. Numbers matter, but people build the products that generate those numbers. When Jamal almost lost time with his daughter because of rigid policy, we didn't just keep a good engineer. We kept a man who now works with even more dedication because he knows the company values his family as much as his code. That kind of loyalty compounds over time in ways spreadsheets can't always predict. I've seen it at Harmony. Employees who feel supported don't just stay, they innovate. They stay late not because they have to, but because they want to. They bring their best selves to work because they aren't torn apart at home." He paused, letting the words settle, then continued with quiet passion. "A kindness isn't the opposite of good business. It's the foundation of sustainable success. We're not asking to throw money away. We're asking to invest in the humans who make this company run. On the long run, that investment pays dividends in lower turnover, higher creativity, stronger reputation. And more importantly, it lets us sleep at night knowing we didn't sacrifice people on the altar of short-term gains." Laura nodded slowly from the head of the table, her expression one of quiet pride. "Oh, Mark is right. We've already seen the early results in the departments that adopted the pilot programs. Engagement scores are up 12%. Voluntary turnover is down, and the press coverage from the privacy honesty has brought in new talent that wants to work for a company that actually stands for something. We're not softening the company. We're strengthening it in the ways that matter most. The discussion continued for another hour with back and forth questions and some resistance, but Mark answered every concern with patience and real examples, never raising his voice, never making anyone feel small for asking. By the end of the meeting, even Richard was nodding thoughtfully, conceding that perhaps there was room to run the numbers on a phased global rollout. Laura called for a vote on moving forward with detailed planning, and the motion passed with a clear majority. As the room emptied, Laura caught Mark's eye and gave him a small, meaningful nod of thanks. It was another small victory, another step in the long journey of weaving compassion into the DNA of a massive corporation. Mark felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Not because he had won an argument, but because more people would now have the support they needed to face life's hardest moments without losing their livelihood. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Mark traveled to several international offices, meeting with local teams in London, Toronto, and Mumbai to listen to their specific family challenges. In the UK office, he sat with a single mother named Priya who was struggling to balance night shifts with her young son's school schedule. He took notes, asked gentle questions, and promised to bring her insights back to the global framework. In Toronto, he spent an afternoon with a team leader whose aging father had recently moved in with him, learning about the unique Canadian healthcare navigation issues. Each conversation reinforced his belief that selflessness wasn't a luxury for big companies. It was a necessity if they wanted to truly thrive. Back in Chicago, Laura made time in her packed schedule to join some of these listening sessions virtually, her face appearing on the screen with genuine interest. She began to share more of her own story in small ways, talking about how the pressure of her rise had once made her miss important moments with her own family. Employees responded to her openness with surprising warmth. The culture was shifting slowly but visibly from one of relentless performance to one where performance and humanity could coexist. One particularly cold November afternoon, Mark received a call that tested everything they had been building. A major supplier in Southeast Asia was threatening to pull out of a critical contract because of new labor standards eHarmony had introduced as part of the merger integration. The standards required fair wages and reasonable hours for the workers assembling components for their hardware products. The supplier claimed it would make them uncompetitive. The operations team was pressuring Laura to relax the standards just for this vendor to keep the supply chain smooth. Mark walked into Laura's office as she was reviewing the latest reports, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I heard about the supplier issue," he said simply, taking a seat across from her desk. "Oh, what are you thinking?" Laura rubbed her temples, the familiar gesture of exhaustion he had come to recognize. "The numbers say we need them. Switching suppliers would delay production by at least 8 weeks and cost millions. But if we bend on the labor standards, what message does that send to every employee who believes we're actually trying to do better?" Mark leaned forward, his expression thoughtful and kind. "We hold the line, not because it's easy, but because it's right. We can use this as an opportunity to find or even help build a supplier that meets the standards. Offer training, invest in their facilities if needed. It might cost more up front, but it aligns with everything we're trying to become. And it shows the world and our own people that we mean what we say about humanity in business." Laura looked at him for a long moment, the weight of the decision clear in her eyes. Then she nodded. "You're right. Let's do it your way. I'll tell the team to start looking for alternatives and offer support to the current supplier if they want to improve. It won't be popular with some of the finance people, but I think it's the choice that lets us look ourselves in the mirror. The decision wasn't easy. There were tense calls, internal debates, and a temporary dip in projected margins, but Mark and Laura stood firm together, working late nights to find a new path forward. In the end, they secured a new supplier partnership that not only met the standards, but actually improved working conditions for hundreds of workers in the region. The story made quiet headlines in industry publications, and employee pride within the company soared, even higher. Through all of this, the relationship between Mark and Laura continued to evolve in quiet, meaningful ways. They weren't rushing back into anything romantic. The wounds of the past were still there, healed, but remembered. Instead, they built something new, a deep, professional, and personal friendship rooted in the lessons they had both learned. They shared meals in the company cafeteria sometimes, talking about everything from global expansion strategies to favorite books and the small joys of everyday life. Laura started taking more protected time for her mother's appointments, and Mark made sure the office ran smoothly in her absence. There were no grand gestures, just consistent, selfless support that proved more powerful than any dramatic reunion ever could. As winter approached and the holidays drew near, the company planned its first combined holiday event under the new culture. Instead of the usual lavish corporate party focused on networking and impressing clients, Mark and Laura worked together to create something different. They organized a family-inclusive gathering at a large community center near the headquarters with activities for children, support resources for caregivers, and even a small donation drive for local charities. Employees brought their spouses, kids, and parents. The atmosphere was warm and genuine, filled with laughter and conversations that went beyond work titles. At the event, Mark watched from the side as Laura knelt down to help a young girl tie her shoelaces, her expensive suit jacket discarded over a chair, her laugh ringing out freely. It was a side of her the old corporate world had rarely seen, and it filled him with a quiet joy. Later, as the evening wound down and families began heading home with bags of small gifts and full hearts, Laura found him near the exit. "Oh, this was a good idea," she said softly, her eyes bright with the success of the night. People needed this. I needed this." Mark smiled, the same gentle, authentic smile that had carried him through the last 5 years. "We all did. It reminds us why we do any of this. Not for the stock price or the corner office, but for the chance to make someone's day a little lighter, their burden a little easier to carry." They stood together watching the last families leave, the lights of the community center casting a warm glow on the snowy street outside. In that moment, the long journey from divorce to this unexpected partnership felt complete in a way neither of them had anticipated. There were still challenges ahead. Global expansion would bring new cultural complexities. Shareholders would continue to demand growth. Old habits in the industry would push back against the kinder approach. But with each small act of selflessness, with each choice to put humanity first, they were proving that it was possible to build something better. The story of Mark and Laura was far from over. It was simply entering a new chapter, one written not with dramatic twists or power struggles, but with the steady, heartfelt commitment to kindness that had brought them this far. As they stepped out into the cold Chicago night together, ready for whatever the next day would bring, the city lights seemed to shine a little brighter, a quiet testament to the power of two people choosing compassion over convenience, one day and one decision at a time.